Hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a heartfelt story of love, trust, and second chances, following Alex, Tu Na, and baby Henry as they return to the farm, facing old wounds, unspoken promises, and the quiet moments that could change their future forever. Will their shared days be enough to heal the past? And when Alex finally finds the courage to speak his heart, will Tu Na choose to stay? Stick with us until the end to find out. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. The ride back to the farm was mostly silent, except for the soft purr of the engine and the occasional cry from Henry, nestled in Tu Na's arms. Yesterday's rain had washed the air clean, leaving it cool and heavy with the smell of damp soil. Alex kept his eyes on the road, but every so often he glanced at Tu Na, still unsure if she was here for good this time. When they reached the old wooden gate, it swung open with a familiar creak. Alex was out first, grabbing the bags before Tu Na could even try. "Let me," he said, gentle, but with a firmness that told her he meant it. The path inside was slick from the rain, puddles catching the pale light of morning. They stepped into the house, the air cooler inside, with a stillness that felt almost watchful. Alex set Henry's things down, then pointed toward a spot by the window. "It's cooler here. Good for him to rest." Tu Na nodded, lowering the baby onto a mat, her hands moving with the natural ease of someone who's done it 100 times before. Alex fetched a mosquito net, draping it carefully, like he was guarding something more precious than just a sleeping child. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the farm lay quiet but worn, vegetable beds choked with weeds, the chicken coop sagging in disrepair. Tu Na's eyes swept over it all, and a soft sigh escaped her. "Things have changed," she murmured. Alex's reply came steady. "Because you weren't here." It wasn't an accusation, just a truth that had been sitting in the air, waiting to be said. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it was layered, with absence, misunderstandings, and words never spoken. Yet beneath all of that, there was something unbroken, some invisible thread that had pulled them both back to this place. Morning light spilled into the yard, glinting off the raindrops still clinging to the leaves. Alex handed Tu Na a broom, wordless, but full of meaning. She took it without question. Side by side, they began to sweep the courtyard, the scratch of the straw bristles becoming a quiet rhythm between them. From the corner of her eye, Tu Na saw Alex moving toward the chicken coop, scattering feed like he'd done all his life. The hens clucked and shuffled, filling the air with the kind of sound that feels like home. She felt a faint smile tug at her lips. This was the rhythm she'd once known, the one she'd walked away from. When Alex called her over to the fish pond, she followed, brushing hair from her face. The water rippled as feed hit the surface, flashes of silver darting up to claim it. "They've grown," Alex said quietly. "Faster than I expected." Tu Na crouched beside him, the breeze lifting her sleeve. "Maybe they were waiting for you to come back," she answered, her voice almost lost to the wind. They worked without rush, sweeping, feeding, checking the vegetable patch. Alex paused once, leaning on the broom handle, watching Tu Na carry a basket toward the shed. "From now on," she said, meeting his gaze just for a second, "I won't make you worry like before." Something softened in his expression. He didn't answer, not with words, but his eyes lingered, as if memorizing the way sunlight traced her profile. The farm felt different, not because of the chores, but because of the quiet steps they were taking together. By late afternoon, the air carried the scent of damp soil and fresh feed. Alex came back from the market with a basket in one hand, fresh fish, leafy greens, and a small bundle of eggs. Tu Na was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, rinsing vegetables under a thin stream of water. He set the basket on the counter. "For dinner," he said simply. She glanced at the fish, then at him. "You didn't have to." Alex only shrugged. "It's been a long time since we ate together here." The kitchen filled with the sizzle of oil, the steady chop of a knife, and the shuffle of feet. Every now and then, their eyes would meet, briefly, but with something unguarded. Outside, dusk folded itself over the fields, the windows catching the fading gold. When they sat down, the table was modest. Steamed vegetables, fried eggs, and the fish Alex had brought. Tu Na took a bite and nodded. "Good," she said slowly. "Really good." Halfway through the meal, Alex spoke. "If you stay, don't leave again." It wasn't a demand, just a wish that had grown too heavy to keep inside. Tu Na set her chopsticks down, meeting his gaze over the rising steam of the rice. "I won't." The farm seemed to still outside, as if it too was listening. In the quiet clink of bowls and the hum of evening, a fragile promise began to take root. Night settled gently. The air cooled, and the last light slipped beyond the hills. In the kitchen, the faint warmth of their meal still lingered. Henry slept soundly in the next room, his breathing steady in the hush. Alex stood by the counter, silent for a long time before finally speaking. "You know, people talked. They had their opinions. About you, about us." His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of years. Tu Na didn't move. She kept her eyes on the soft flicker of the oil lamp. She knew exactly what he meant. The whispers, the sideways glances, the questions that were never truly questions. "I've carried those voices with me," Alex continued, "but none of them mattered as much as the thought of you, here, with me." He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket. A small, worn velvet box appeared in his hand. "I don't want you here just for a season, or until things feel easy again," he said. "I want you and Henry here for the rest of our lives." He opened the box. The silver band inside caught the lamplight, simple, unadorned, and honest. Tu Na's eyes shimmered, her answer unspoken, but clear in the way her hand moved toward his. It wasn't the end of their struggles, but after so many storms, there was a light between them now, and it felt unbreakable. Morning arrived, with soft voices drifting through another house in the village. Alex's sisters sat with their mother, sharing tea at the wooden table. Sunlight streamed in through the open doorway, catching on the wisps of steam curling from their cups. "I'll be heading home soon, with my husband and the kids," his sister said, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her cup. Their mother nodded, but her thoughts seemed elsewhere. "I just wish Alex would settle down," she murmured. "Then I could leave here for a while without worrying." Her words carried affection, but also an edge of urgency. Years of watching over her son had made her wary of leaving him alone, both in this house and in life. She talked about her last trip to the countryside, how she'd cooked for Alex, and her quiet hope that one day someone else might take on that role. The creak of the screen door broke the moment. Alex had come home. "You're back late," his sister teased, though her eyes were curious. He set down his bag with a faint smile. "I took Tu Na and Henry back to the farm," he said. "We had dinner there." Their mother's expression softened. She didn't press for details, but something in her gaze hinted she could see a shift in him. Something steadier, more certain. Alex excused himself, saying he had work to finish upstairs. As he climbed the steps, the voices below faded into a soft background hum. The sounds of family, of expectations, of bonds that sometimes pull in opposite directions. But for the first time in years, Alex didn't feel weighed down by those ties. Maybe they weren't chains after all. Maybe they were roots, deep enough to hold steady, even if storms came again. The next morning, his sister was already dressed and standing by the door, ready to leave. "Before I go," she said, "I want to see Tu Na and the baby." Her voice was warm, but there was a trace of something else, maybe a thread of unfinished business. Alex checked the time, then nodded. "I'll take you." The drive to the farm was quiet. Fields stretched out on either side, still damp from the week's rain. When they arrived, Tu Na was sitting on the porch, Henry tucked against her shoulder. She stood quickly, greeting them with tea and a shy smile. Inside, the air was cool and carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass. They chatted about simple things: the weather, the fish pond, the grapefruit trees. But soon, his sister's tone shifted. "About what happened before?" she began carefully. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to speak so harshly." Tu Na lowered her eyes, the steam from her cup curling up between them. "It's in the past," she said softly. It felt like a door finally closing, one that had been left open far too long. Henry stirred in her arms, and Alex stepped forward to take him, holding the baby with a practiced ease. His sister reached out, brushing her hand lightly against the child's cheek. "He's a good baby," she said with a smile. "If you ever need anything at all, just tell us." They stayed like that for a while. No big speeches, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet, careful weaving back of trust, thread by thread, in the soft light of morning. When it was time to go, Alex carried his sister's bag to the car. The gravel crunched under their shoes, fading as they reached the gate. Tu Na stood on the porch with Henry, the baby's tiny hand clutching the fabric of her shirt. "Take care of yourself," his sister said, her gaze lingering on Tu Na a moment longer than necessary. "And take care of him," she added, nodding toward Henry. Tu Na's reply was quiet but certain. "I will." The car engine rumbled to life, cutting into the stillness. Alex looked back once before getting in. Just a brief glance, but one heavy with the promise he'd made the night before. When the dust of the road finally settled, silence wrapped around the farm again. Inside, Tu Na laid Henry down, where a patch of afternoon sunlight warmed the floor. She sat beside him, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the curve of his cheek. Alex's words from the night before came back to her, clear and steady. "I want you and Henry here for the rest of our lives." She closed her eyes, not to shut the thought out, but to hold it closer. Outside, the fields moved gently in the wind, as though the land itself was breathing with her. Somewhere between the hush of the room and the soft rustle of leaves, she felt it, a fragile but persistent pull toward staying. It wasn't yet a spoken answer, but it was the beginning of one. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the wind outside, to Henry's steady breathing, and to the echo of Alex's voice. Each word seemed to sink deeper than the last, and in that quiet, she realized her heart had already shifted closer to his than she dared to admit. But will she take that final step? Will she place her trust in him after all they've endured? That night, the farm lay under a blanket of stars. The cicadas sang in the distance, and a faint breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the open window. Tu Na sat on the porch, rocking Henry gently, watching the shadows stretch across the yard. In the dim glow of the oil lamp inside, Alex moved about quietly, closing shutters, checking the locks, making sure the house felt safe. When he stepped out to join her, he didn't speak right away. He just stood there for a moment, looking out at the fields, as if trying to imagine all the seasons they might see together. "Cold?" he asked softly. She shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, I'm warm." It wasn't just the baby in her arms or the evening air. It was the weight of something steady settling in her chest. Alex reached for her free hand. She didn't pull away. The night around them seemed to lean in, holding their silence like a secret. And in that quiet, Tu Na felt the answer she hadn't spoken yet. Clearer, stronger, waiting just at the edge of her lips. After months apart, Alex brings Tu Na and baby Henry back to the farm, where the air is fresh, but the weight of old rumors still lingers. As they work side by side, sweeping the yard, tending the animals, cooking dinner, small gestures begin to rebuild the trust they once had. That night, Alex opens his heart, offering not just a ring, but a promise for the future. The next day, his sister visits, apologizing for past harsh words and meeting Henry for the first time. A quiet truce begins to take shape. Left alone at the farm, Tu Na reflects on Alex's words and feels the pull to stay growing stronger. Beneath the stillness, an unspoken answer waits, one that could turn their fragile reunion into something unbreakable.